The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Greetings from Albuquerque, New Mexico, and welcome to another 1615 webinar. I'm Matthew Ellison, President at 1615. Today's webinar is entitled Reimagining the Missionary Sending Process. This webinar moves the missionary sending conversation from the mission agency to the front door of the local church. The material can assist a church in building greater ownership of sending and move beyond the status quo of ministry. Today's subject matter is my friend Steve Barron. He's a longtime pastor at Calvary Church in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and author of Well Sent, Reimagining the Church's Missionary Sending Process. He'll be drawing from his book today as he shares his insights with you. In just a moment, I will hand the microphone over to Steve, but first, a couple of details. Your phones are muted to preserve sound quality, which means you can listen through your computer speakers or you can call in on the telephone. As questions come to mind today, please type them in the question and answer panel located in the GoToWebinar task panel on the upper right-hand side of your screen. Steve will be addressing your questions for the last 15 to 20 minutes of our time together. Over 60 people have registered for today's live webinar. This webinar is also being recorded and will be available for download at 1615.org in the next few weeks. Once again, that's 1615.org next few weeks. I'm going to be turning it over to Steve today, and Steve, I want to thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and experience with this audience today. Give me just a second to hand the controls over to you, and then the webinar belongs to you, Steve.
Okay.
You're ready to go.
Okay. Thank you, Matthew. And I first of all want to say thank you to 1615 for bringing us together today. I've really benefited from both Matthew's ministry and 1615, so thank you very much. Well, I should say at the outset that our time's going to go rather quickly. I'm going to move rather rapidly at times, but I think the key is really doing a little Q&A at the end, and I trust that'll be helpful. The first thing just to keep in mind is that when we talk about the book Well Sent or Reimagining the Missionary Sending Process, we're primarily talking about the North American church context. We can at another time talk about other contexts, but today it's the North American church. All right, here we go. Now we're just finally getting everything working here. Really, this webinar is an attempt to place a local church at the center of the sending process. Because of a variety of issues, it's true that the North American church has been rather passive about this whole area of sending. They've at times been very content to outsource it to agencies. And the agency as well has been comfortable at times with informing the church about sending activity, but not necessarily equipping the church or facilitating local church ownership. So in all of this, it's important for those kinds of things to develop, and that's what we can talk about today. This question before you is a question that I posed at a very informal dinner meeting in the Chicago area about 4 years ago. There were 4 mission organizations and several local churches there in this meeting, and there was a great deal of consternation shared about the fewer number of missionary candidates and the quality of those candidates. And I posed this very question to them at the end of the discussion: how many mission agencies are equipping churches to recruit their own missionaries? Well, it's probably not surprising, but no one in that particular audience was equipping the church. No one knew of someone else who was equipping the church, and no one was actually studying effective sending church models around the country. So people were not learning from each other. There we go. So how many individuals seek the church's blessing for their own plans and vision for ministry? Usually things have been done unilateral of the local church, and without a sense of local church participation, there's not really going to be an ability to develop ownership. Many times in our own church ministry, we've had people come to us and they've explained their vision for ministry and their way of doing things and their needs, and put out their hand and asked us to pay for their agenda. And that's what we're trying to avoid by trying to build a greater strength and sense of participation on the part of the church. So well sent is an attempt to move the conversation, as Matthew said, to the front door of the local church. When sending is a topic of conversation in the church, it's important because it will make sending more normative in the church. Right now, it's not a typical local church experience. If you were to ask yourself this question, when was the last time we sent anybody out? That could be very, very telling for all of us. So usually I say, has anyone in this church sent anyone out within the last 5 years? And it's pretty typical that churches have not done any sending within the recent 5 years. So that's what we want to talk about. So part one, and there are going to be 4 parts, and we'll go rather quickly, but part one is talking about owning the church's special task. By that special task, we're talking about making disciples of all the ethnic groups of the world. We do this, of course, by going and baptizing and teaching to obey. And we do this because this is what we were commanded to do. So for a variety of reasons, sending has fallen on hard times. I want to give you a number of examples of this. First of all, sending is perceived as outdated nowadays. The graying of the missionary workforce has sent messages to the younger or young adult generation that it's a method of a previous generation, but not a method for them. Another reason why things have fallen on hard times is post-colonial theology has valued national culture and national leaders to a point of actually becoming anti-missionary. So we see that periodically, and one of my examples in the book, Well Sent, is an example of a full-page ad in Christianity Today which says, "Thank you for not coming." And it was a promotion to get American money and not American missionaries. Another reason why is that Acts 1:8 is sometimes interpreted sequentially and not simultaneously. Some people have said, simply because we haven't gotten our act together yet in our local Jerusalem or Judea and Samaria, we dare not go into the uttermost parts of the world because that would be hypocritical. Then there's the rise of terrorism in the world, and then there's the peaking of interest in compassion ministries like drilling a well and feeding the hungry and fighting for justice. And I think it's important that the Bible doesn't teach one to the exclusion of the other. It teaches both and. And then I want to also point out that one of the other common reasons why sending has fallen on hard times is the rise of the global south, with some concluding as a result that we need not send any missionaries. So I have a quote here in front of me from J.D. Payne. Some of you may be familiar with him and his writings. He was quoted as saying, "The truth is that the Great Commission is just as binding on the Western Church as it is on the majority church. Anything less is to abdicate our responsibilities." So it's not an adequate excuse or rationale for leaving the sending game. Now let's just go to part two, owning the church's special path. When you talk with agencies, or a person interested in missions talks to an agency, they do become aware in a very short time that the agency has a bit of a prescribed process for individuals to go through as an agency attempts to facilitate people to going overseas. I think at the same time, it's important for the church to do something similar to the agency and develop some kind of a prescribed process. So really, the question we want to ask is this: what would it look like for a church to be prepared to lead a person's journey into cross-cultural ministry? This is really where the church flounders. And I've been a part of the local church for almost 40 years, and I love the local church, but this is a weakness, an inherent weakness in the church. Now, I want to mention that if anyone is interested, what I would like to do is to make available a very simple document called A Missions Journey with a Local Church. So if someone listening to me today has an interest in what it would look like for a church to be prepared to lead a person's journey into cross-cultural ministry, they can simply request this document, and they can contact my administrative assistant, Terry Sherman. So it's just a simple email address of tsherman, S-H-E-R-M-A-N, @calvarychurch.org, and request the missions journey with the local church, and she can get that out to you later today. But that would give you a little bit more of a sampling of what I'm talking about, and give you, I think, just a wealth of possibilities of what can really happen. So as we think about this special journey, it's important to think about what ingredients can fortify the local church to send. So every church should really fortify itself to do this. And the first ingredient that is very, very important is presenting a high view of God. We need to ask ourselves in local church ministry, what kind of message about God are we serving up in our ministries every single week? And then as well, we need to understand two things: that a high view of God really will result in a better understanding of God's character and his heart for the world. And secondly, a high view of God will encourage people to more readily take steps of faith into the unknown. If they have a weak and anemic view of God, it's not going to engender a great deal of courage or faith and trust in moving into the unknown of the world. So a high view of God is a very, very important thing. The second ingredient is simply presenting healthy role models. And this is a critically important thing. A role model is simply someone who wants God's heart for the world to become more prominent in their church. And again, this is an attempt to make certain things more normative. If there aren't role models in the church, then it raises a whole host of other questions in the minds of people who are or would maybe consider cross-cultural ministry. So what a church needs to do in regard to role models is to borrow them and develop them. So those are some very key things for all of us, and that really just becomes part of a disciple-making process of some type. So it's just a very biblical and sensible thing to extend your ministry and to broaden influence for work around the world. Then I would say a third ingredient is developing greater financial capacity to send. Now, sometimes I've avoided talking about money, but I put it in the book simply because money is one of the biggest excuses related to non-participation in the Great Commission. So because of that, I talk a little bit about it, and it's important for a church to develop some type of plan to invest financially in overseas ministry. So whether that's a savings program or creative thinking in the church to generate interest and more systematic giving, it's going to be important for people to do that. And then at the same time, while you're developing a little bit more of a financial challenge for your congregation, it also helps develop a robust faith. So you're going to need some kind of faith to act on that plan. There isn't any such thing as a perfect faith, perfect plan, I should say. So to act on that, it's going to take some faith and trust in the Lord. Now, the fourth ingredient is developing advocacy among leaders, among church leaders. So what do we mean by advocacy? Well, we're not expecting a senior pastor or others on the church staff to drop what they're doing and to do everything missions related. That's not what we're talking about. It is talking about two things. First of all, leaders providing a public endorsement of missions in the church. That's one very, very important thing. And the second thing is allowing people to build this type of emphasis into the life of the church. So that becomes another very important part of all that we talk about and all that we do. So church leadership is going to need to understand the importance of this, and then understand the importance of releasing their people to actually practice it in a wide variety of ways, not unilateral of church leadership, but with their blessing, support, and oversight. Now, I want to also mention part 3, owning the church's special relationships. There are, in my mind, several special relationships. I'm just going to mention 2 today because I developed them a little bit in the book, and I think it can be helpful for you. The first relationship, of course, is a relationship to the mission agency. And so what I think it's important to understand is that the local church is the sender of missionaries, and the agency is the facilitator of missionaries. So the agency does not send, the agency facilitates, the agency deploys missionaries, but the church sends. When you look at Acts 13, when Barnabas and Saul were sent out by the Antioch church, there wasn't any parachurch organization there. And I have an affectionate relationship with a number of good mission agencies, but none of them are included in Acts 13. So the church commissioned them. The church gave them authority to represent the church in the gospel ministry, and so it's the church that sends. I saw several years ago a really fascinating advertisement in a Christian magazine, and it simply said this. It was paid for by a mission agency, and it said, "We have no missionaries. Churches have missionaries." And I thought it was a rather clever ad, and it really got right to the point of who sends and who facilitates. Now, if any of you have the book, I'm just going to mention a couple of other things, and that is take note of Appendix 5 in the book called the Sending Triangle that really describes in great detail the role of the church, the agency, and the person being sent. And then as well Appendix 8 called Measuring Agency Partnership Potential. It's really, I think, a tremendous tool and help for the local church. So just if some of you are taking notes, that may be a further help to you. But let me also tell you why it's important for the agency and the church to come together over ministry and why this relationship is key. I'm going to mention 4 common touch points that affect the church and the agency on a regular basis. The first touch point is affirming a call. The church and the agency can participate in this together. In Acts 13, the Holy Spirit actually indicated to the church leaders as well as Barnabas and Saul that they were set apart for this ministry. So the church is going to be, I believe, notified in some way, shape, or form by the Holy Spirit in terms of affirming a call. And the agency obviously can develop those kinds of relationships to assist the church in recognizing that. Then developing a common ministry vision. A church finding an agency that has common vision and values and how to implement ministry and talking about ministry direction is also another point in which ministries overlap. Thirdly, in terms of a touch point, we have decision making that at times should be shared. So let me give you an example. We always like to make sure that we are notified by our own missionaries whenever our missionaries consider anything major, a major change coming, like the location of their ministry or the role of their ministry. And we really think that since we've sent them out, that we need to be the prime collaborators with the missionary and the agency in making those shared decisions, because sometimes decisions have been on an act and inform basis, which is really not a healthy partnership model to take. So decision making is an important thing. We have even acted at times with what we call a right of review, so that every time a major decision comes, we're asking our own people to collaborate with us so that we actually are still in sync with each other. And then finally, the fourth touch point is member care. So obviously a An agency can be well equipped to do this, but a church can offer its own unique member care contributions, and that's again where we all overlap. So the first relationship, special relationship, is the church and the agency. Now, the local church should also develop a relationship to remaining unfinished task, and that's important for a lot of obvious reasons. We've actually been given a commission. We're expected to complete this commission, and so every church should in some way define its role in addressing the remaining unfinished task. That's the work that remains to be done. Hence, we put our shoulder to that plow. So it is quite important. Now, the question to ask then as a result is, how do you hold yourself accountable as a church to do this? In what way can you enter into this? Well, I think it does take some educating of the local church toward what are the remaining needs in the world, what is unfinished, and then as a result developing a document that could potentially explain or articulate what your relationship is to that remaining unfinished task, and then to use that document on a regular basis to, number one, be an educational piece for your congregation, but secondly, to hold you accountable to getting the remaining unfinished task done. So I think that's very, very important, and something that is obvious and yet very easily overlooked, so we're stating the obvious here. Now, let me just ask you this question as it relates to the remaining unfinished task. If every local church in the world were to practice missions like you do, would the Great Commission ever be accomplished? How effective is your ministry model right now? To what degree would you recommend your ministry model to others so that you can, in a very collaborative way, learn from each other? So I think that's a very, very important thing, and not to be overlooked by any stretch. Now I'm going to move directly to part 4 and talk about owning the church's special challenges. There are some real special challenges here, special, I would say, even use the word dangers, and these dangers are very subtle, but I'm going to just comment on them, and then we can take some questions and comments from the audience. The first danger of the sending church model is adopting the worker but not the work. When a missionary comes home on home assignment, do the ministry interests, do the vision for ministry and the resources all come home with them? Well, largely they do. So how attached to ministry audiences overseas are we? Have we really adopted the work as well as the worker? It's very common to develop strong bonds with the ones that get sent out, but it's not common that people get attached to the ministry audiences of our workers. And I think it's a both and, it's not an either or. So it's very, very important to understand that. Let me give you, because I think this is a very important point, I'm going to camp on this for a minute. Let me give you an example from experience. A number of years ago, there was a family that went out to Sierra Leone, West Africa, to work among a people group called the Yalunkas. And there was no previous missionary work ever done in this group. This family spent 10 years with this group, and after 10 years there was a small emerging church developing out of this group of people. Both of the parents in this family came back to the States very sick, and the medical advice was that they not return back to their field ministry. So they decided to go to their churches that were supporting them and explain a change of plans, that they would not be going back. So when they met with the missions leadership in each of these churches, they asked the question, how many of you are still praying for the Yalunka people? And the very common answer to that question was, oh, we're not praying for the Yolunka people, we're praying for you. So right then and there, these missionaries said, for the very first time in our lives, we realized we were focusing on two different things. So it's pretty critically important that we get this and get it right from the beginning, that we adopt the worker and the work. Now, an additional danger. A danger for any church or organization is missions drift. Mission drift is wandering from your original purpose. It's a very, very typical thing. It's something we all try to guard against. And there are so many things to grab the attention of the North American church nowadays that it's very, very easy to slip into this, to just wander a little bit off the original commitment. So it's important to do some kind of a, maybe an annual or semi-annual, biannual, whatever you want to do, audit of yourself or review of yourself, just to make sure that there isn't any kind of ministry slippage involved. So a healthy checkup on occasion is important, with some clearly spelled out desires of what your original purpose really is, what your intentions really are for ministry. So that's a critically important thing. Now, moving along to the other issue is, another danger for any church or organization is mission creep. We talk about drift, but mission creep is just as deadly. And when we talk about missions creep, we're talking about diluting our original purpose. So taking on so many things that your original purpose is either lost or at least obscured. So it's really important that you somehow build in some safeguards so that you don't dilute your purpose either. So some of the things that can be done to avoid this, to mission creep, is to have clear, defined terms. If I were to ask any of you listening to me today how you would define the word missions, and I would probably ask a number of people in your church, you'd probably come up with a lot of different definitions. So it's important to have clear definitions. Our definition in our church ministry at Calvary Church is a definition that goes like this. We don't actually even use the word missions anymore. We use the word global ministries, just because missions has gotten to mean all things to all people. So we would say global ministries is crossing barriers of distance, language, and culture to make disciples of all nations. We would even make a distinction between evangelism and missions. Let me give you an example. We would say the definition of evangelism is helping people believe in Jesus. And we would say the working definition of missions, if you want to use that term then, or global ministries, is helping people know there's a Jesus to believe in. That's a pretty significant difference. So we would say evangelism is the church growing where it is, and missions is the church going where it isn't. So these kinds of definitions can clarify a wide variety of things and help you to stay on task. So it's pretty important that you look at mission drift and mission creep and take that seriously and build into your ministry some safeguards to avoid that. Now, in all of this that I've just talked about, I just want you to remember that this is an attempt to move the sending conversations to the front door of the church. So I would just say that I'm not espousing a cure-all and all the answers for all of your ministries, but I think some of this summarization I trust will be helpful to bring this full circle back into the church, because right now it's either individuals who are driving all the agendas or it's the agencies, and it's not necessarily the fault of the individuals or agencies alone to see that this takes place. It in fact is the church that has been extremely reluctant to assume its rightful ownership of the Great Commission task. So in all this, I think I can probably turn it back to Matthew, and we could even begin some questions. And if we don't have questions, I certainly have some other things that I can comment on. So let's go to that, Matthew, and let's see what we've got.
Okay, Steve, we do have some questions coming in. And by the way, excellent material. I really appreciate the content that you shared today. Let's see. Related to mission creep, this is from Nicholas Todd. How do you balance supporting a missionary and both thrilled about the work? They've been trained by you, connect well with you, but feel led down a path that does not seem to be in agreement with the most unreached peoples of the world. Are they immediately turned away from partnership, or do you have some other plan for them? Great question, Nicholas.
Am I on? Can I go forward with this then, Matthew?
It's your turn, Steve.
Okay, thank you. I can tell you what Calvary Church does, and I can make some additional comments on this. I'm not necessarily even suggesting that Calvary Church in every situation is handling these things perfectly. We all know the struggles involved in trying to understand what is the best step forward. I would say there are so many variables to something like this, but I would say that we have to start making some hard decisions. These hard decisions need to be backed by some documentation which could explain why we make decisions. So in our situation, we would not give the robust amount of monthly support to some of those people that aren't really fully invested in the vision of Calvary Church. Right now at Calvary Church, we would say we're all about the Muslim, Buddhist, and Hindu worlds. Well, if people are not going into those three arenas of the world, then, which does happen, we just say that's a primary focus, not an exclusive focus, and we would attempt to recognize some of that, but it would not be at the same level of support and even exposure in the church. So it's almost like having a two-tiered approach to things, and some people can be entirely uncomfortable with it, and there are tensions that exist. We say it's not a problem to be solved, it's a tension to be managed. So that's how we've approached it, and I don't know whether that helps our brother a little bit, but I readily hear you because I'm passionate about going to the least reach. That's what we feel like we want to be about. But we do recognize at Calvary that there are those occasional times when some people can be directed of the Lord to some other things. We just recognize that through exposure and monthly support and what its level really is.
That's a great answer, Steve. I have an example that's just fresh in my mind. I'm working with a church in Venice, Florida, Crossroads, and they're going through our coaching process, and they're really moving from the shotgun approach to missions to a very strategic, intentional approach, focus on cross-cultural, least reach peoples, but they're wondering what to do with this cadre of people that have been raised up and supported through the church, and they did exactly what you described. So they have Crossroads-focused missions and Crossroads-supported missions, and they still have a category for that. But another thing that I wanted to surface, when you have a focused approach, Steve, I've encouraged churches when someone does rise up in your church and say, I feel led to go, I think the first thing that should happen is encouragement to consider the area of focus. Again, not to say that they wouldn't continue to receive support if they went elsewhere, but if you have a focused mission, encourage them and share the benefits and merits of going to those places where your church is deeply invested. So just an example of that. Here's a question from Mark. Oh, I'm sorry, Steve, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say that I completely agree, and it is a challenge, but to give people a strong rationale for why you're doing what you're doing, it just is an important thing, and it will continue to ensure that more people will become strategic in their thinking as well and join you in that process.
Yeah, I'm just going to throw something out here. I wanted to be questions, but again, when we're helping a church to define its global focus and define missions, as you described, Steve, one of the things we talk about is a strategic approach moves churches from first asking, what missionaries are we going to support, to first asking, what mission has God called us to accomplish? It's just a simple, set of words here, but again, not that missionaries aren't critical to the work, but I love what you said about the focus being on the work and the worker. So this is from Jonathan Merrill. He says, what is your opinion for the amount, percentage of financial support sending church should send the missionary out with in terms of the overall budget if everything does align with the missions and vision?
Well, it's a great question, and every church is going to find that, some of these decisions are a little bit arbitrary. So what we would do as a church is going to be a little bit different than what you would do. The size, the scope of the church, the experience, all these things factor into it. I can tell you what we've done at Calvary, and I'll comment on it beyond that. If a person or a couple going overseas fully align with everything that we've ever talked about, and they jump through all of our hoops and meet all the requirements, and we're still together and thrilled about that, we actually consider 50% of their total support. So we take 1/2 of everything that they need, and then if they're not fully aligned, then we have a little bit of a system to try to determine where we do land. We all have a church-based missionary preparation course that we provide here at Calvary, and it takes a minimum of 3 years to go through that course. So it's a pretty rigorous preparation process. So as a result of somebody going through that process, if they jump through all the hoops, that's why we actually give them 50% of our total, of their total support need. So it will vary. I've seen statistics, Matthew, about from some mission organizations where they said at one point in time the sending church, the home church, was averaging 22% of their total support. I think that's down somewhere in the neighborhood of about 14% of their total support. So that's just what averages are telling us out there today. And I always ask people, how many of you want to be average? So that's how we've handled it.
Yeah, that's really great. And I appreciate what you said. Some of this is arbitrary. I think every church's global vision needs to be endemic, biblical, but endemic. It needs to take into account their circumstances and their approach. So thanks for that comment, Steve. Mm-hmm. This is from Harmony. I love how you talked about the missionaries being sent from the church and not the mission organization. I hear that many missionaries leave the field due to transition and other difficulties that come up with their kids. Who do you suggest is responsible for caring for those missionary kids? How does Calvary deal with missionary kids? Great question, Harmony. Steve, it's yours.
Yeah, thank you. Well, what I would say is we have kind of backed up the truck just a little bit at Calvary, and we've asked ourselves the question, which mission organizations do we really want to develop a long-term, deeper relationship with? And then once we decided to try to figure that out, we then decided what criteria would we use to develop what we call a preferred agency list. And one of the criteria to get on our preferred agency list is a mission agency making a significant commitment to member care. So we say it's not a required list. It is a preferred list. But again, if someone goes off the preferred list, then we don't take on the same kind of percentages of support or provide everything in the exact way we do if somebody stays within the list. So when you have a family and there are children's issues in hand, or there are any member care issues whatsoever, it really is a call for the church and the agency to collaborate together. There shouldn't be a mentality of, well, that's the agency's problem, or that's what the church should step up and do. There should be a rather healthy collaboration of the two together. And then they can assess their resources and experience and determine how to best care for these families. So Calvary doesn't look at this as, wow, this is our bailiwick since we're sending the missionaries and we're stuck doing all this ourselves. We really look for organizations that really have a heart and understand this and want to be good stewards of these people who are our most valuable resources. And then we collaborate together and sometimes divide up responsibilities, and you know, we bring them home, we pay for counseling, we take care of medical bills, we provide housing when they're here in stateside. We do a wide variety of things. We have what we call PAC teams, which simply stands for prayer and care teams. Every single one of our workers, when they go out, they are required to develop their own PAC team, which is a minimum of 6 adults. Those 6 adults act as the grassroots member care for all things related to the needs of our workers. So there are, you know, a whole host of things. If somebody was actually even interested in getting a document like our PAC team document, they could again just email Terry at tsherman@calvarychurch.org, and she'll be glad to send out a copy, and you can see what a PAC team does and how people recruit them.
Steve, you said the word required. I'm guessing by the use of that word that's actually a prerequisite then to be sent out as a missionary from Calvary, is that they would have a PAC team in place.
Yeah, that's exactly right, Matthew. They have to submit the list of the PAC team and contact information, because we periodically get these PAC teams together and let them cross-pollinate, because they're constantly coming up with new ideas for how to reach out and care for our workers. So some of it's very proactive, or sometimes we've all gotten together because they've faced some of the more difficult assignments and they know that the church is weighing in on it from my office, but they also would like to participate and do something. So it takes a little bit of coordinating, but PAC teams are so valuable, are so important that we've required it, yes.
Yeah, I know some churches that when they commission their missionaries, they actually bring up their care teams as well.
Yeah.
And they really emphasize the biblical gravity of this role. In 3 John,
that's right.
John commands Gaius because he sent these workers out in a manner worthy of God's name. And churches that elevate the importance of member care and sending the way the Bible does, the people will take it seriously. I want to emphasize that. I think when it's kind of, you know, slapdash or haphazard, which is often what I see, of course the member care teams aren't going to take it seriously. But to note there. This is a great question, Steve. You mentioned we need to make sending a normative conversation at church. Where do these conversations and teachings take place? At the pulpit? Someplace else? Where do you have these type of conversations?
Wow, what a really nice question here. I think those that want the conversations to take place need to start evaluating what possible opportunities do they have within their own church. So is it possible to get that done from the pulpit? If it can be done from the pulpit, that's an ideal place to do it. If it can't be, for whatever reason, done from the pulpit, then you look at your adult education schematics, whether they're small groups or Sunday morning classes, and you can continue to organize dialogue in those smaller settings. But what we also do is, this is just one simple little thing that we've done, but on a regular basis each year we have what we refer to as Starbucks Week. And Starbucks Week is an opportunity for somebody in the congregation to sign up for free fellowship and enjoy Starbucks one evening with somebody from a missions background, to have what we refer to as a starter conversation about missions. And all they have to do is sign up, and then they're treated to Starbucks, and we look at that and instruct our people to simply make friends on that night. And then we can uncover some of the curiosities they have, some of the interests that they might have, And in the context of developing a friendship, we try to shepherd these people along and keep feeding them additional bits and pieces of information that will perhaps be used by God for further clarification about how they participate in the Great Commission cause. And then we also have regular events. You know, we have 2 weekends a year. We call them Global Focus Weekends. And then we have a week-long conference in the spring each year too. So we have 4 Sundays, a minimum of 4 Sundays a year from the pulpit completely committed to this. So that's kind of how we've done a little bit of that.
Steve, I can't resist asking this question. You have a special situation. You have senior leadership that completely affirm you know, the mandate to reach all nations, to take the gospel to all ethnic groups and tribes. How do you speak to the church where those leaders aren't on board? Because I'm sure some of these people online today are not in your situation. They're in a church. There's some missions-minded people. There's even some missions generosity. But the senior leadership, they're not completely bought in. Any suggestions for them?
Well, the first thing I would like to say to those people out there is that they should never be tempted to think that what they're attempting to do for missions in the church won't count for anything. It's a big deal what they're doing. And I just want to affirm them and encourage them, because whether they're aware of it or not, the head of the church, who very much want this commission to be accomplished, sees what they're doing and uses what they're doing, whether it's clearly understood to them at this time or not. So I thank God for each of those people in the church that are willing to volunteer their time and to get the work done. But I would say for those who feel like they don't have the high level of support that they wish they would have at times, I think they need to go to their church leadership and express their own heart for missions, and then simply express, Matthew, that they don't expect the pastor to do the work. They just want him to be a bit of a cheerleader. And then I think it's helpful at times to do a little bit of long-range planning and encourage or invite someone or a few from church leadership positions like deacons or elders, maybe a pastor if you've got somebody on staff, and invite them into a little bit of a long-range planning process to see what they think. And then that can just generate a lot of discussion and further interest and hopefully some collaboration in ministry together. You know, the book does comment on this, so I think I've given like 7 practical suggestions in the book about developing advocacy within your own church. But that is a big issue. Another helpful thing is just to get your pastor overseas. Sometimes what I've actually done is I've encouraged some churches to talk to their own missionaries and ask if they can get permission from their mission organization to develop a line item in their monthly support structure. And let's just say they put aside $100 a month for mobilization, and then at the end of 2 years they actually would have enough money to fly their pastor overseas to see their work or to participate in the ministry. It's just a bank account, a savings account, to get some people overseas firsthand so they could see the work and I think be really impacted by that. So getting them overseas or getting them side by side with people who can also really articulate the Great Commission cause, I think can be helpful for everybody.
Thanks, Steve. Here's another question from Jonathan. I think it's very important. He says, where does short and midterm missions fall into your overall strategy?
Yeah, well, it certainly should fall into some kind of a strategy. You know, our short term is anything 3 months or less. Our long term is 4 months up to 2 years, and long term or career is 2 years or more. So that's how we make the divisions in our church. And again, some of this is arbitrary, but that's just for helpful purposes. And I would say that our short term or our midterm many times are connected to a little bit more of a cohesive strategy but we do that through our own workers, through our missionaries. So we try to get our short-term teams to come alongside of our workers out there overseas, spend time with them. Our midterm people, who could be almost up to 2 years, we try to place them when we can and promote things in close proximity to our workers. So that just develops, I think, a greater sense of family, a little bit more continuity. And there are some times when we just recognize there are special opportunities where there has never been anything done in a certain area before, but because it might fit into our Muslim, Hindu, Buddhist, grid, we just go out and go after it. So it takes some planning, but we initially do short and midterm, oftentimes in collaboration with our own missionaries, and try to work that out.
Thank you, Steve. This is from Naomi. How do you make the needs of your supported missionaries to the congregation effectively? How do you make those needs known effectively?
Well, this is where Calvary may be a little bit different than some other churches, and we have a little bit of history and an ethos that's a little bit different than the average church. What we do is we constantly emphasize that the local church is one of the best ministry investments that a believer can invest in. And that means more than money. That means their time, that means their talents, but it might also mean their money. And so we regularly emphasize that because we have lots and lots and lots of organizations that love to financially solicit through the mail to our congregation. And while we're kingdom-minded and believe that that could also be a great opportunity for our people, we usually say everyone at Calvary should consider giving on a regular basis something, some part of what God has entrusted to them. So they'll hear that from the pulpit. We have a separate missions account from a general account. They actually have to designate it to missions for it to go to missions. If it's non-designated, it goes to the general fund. So we have to educate our people about that. And then I think part of what helps us is we have developed a pretty significant track record in our ministry, so much so that there's a high degree of trust in what we do. So people have confidence in us, and they feel probably the best ministry investment in the life of this church or anywhere would be in the missions program at Calvary. So there's that kind of little preconditioned mindset to that. So we actually don't allow our missionaries to solicit within our congregation. We do it in a with groups of leadership. We don't allow the church to take on a life of its own in terms of solicitation. The scope of our ministry is such that it would be a crazy place if we just allowed regular soliciting all the time. So we have told our people, give to the fund, and I know that that goes against every single thing that you hear nowadays, but we say give to the fund, trust us. And this is the other reason why we say it. We have explained to our people that giving to people and ministries can just be a popularity contest or a beauty contest. And so we might have somebody that is working on aviation in Papua New Guinea, and they're not a good public speaker. They can't articulate things that well, but they can really make airplanes fly, and they need someone like that out there. So that kind of person, if it were just an open solicitation, that kind of person would never gain the attention of other people because they don't have the charismatic personality. And so what we do is we say we bring decision-making into the church in such a way, in a smaller group setting, where people have the ability to make the best informed decisions possible, and that it's the most objectivity possible, so that it doesn't turn into a popularity contest. And when we've explained all these things to them, they've just accepted that, and they give. And sometimes we challenge them to give. So, we usually say, we're not talking about giving to people necessarily, but give to God's work, give to the ministry overseas, and that's how we've handled it.
Steve, I think one of the criticisms against giving to this general fund is it's impersonal. There's a disconnect, and I think the way Calvary is, dealt with that is your congregation knows where you're going. You mentioned the focus areas right now, and all of these, PA teams. So there's a confidence, and it's not impersonal giving. I think the danger of the giant fund is you're disconnected from the work entirely. But I would guess in your church, most people know where you're going, what you're doing, who you're behind. Would you agree with that?
Well, that's exactly right, Matthew. We have people up in front of small groups, larger groups all the time. We say when you're thinking about giving, you need to be thinking about these stories you've just heard and these people who you've just seen, because they're all a part of the bigger picture, and we're all heading in this same direction. So that's how we make it more personal, and we do a lot of telling of stories, things like that, because people need to know that there is life change taking place. One of the things that we say is every single month we have workers in 23 different countries, and the gospel crosses 26 different language groups every single month. So we've challenged them to say, where can you find another ministry that does that? So we just parade these people up there, get behind them, and I think people are delighted to participate.
Well, Steve, it's been really rich today. I thank you for the time and energy that you put into this and the wisdom that you're so willing to share with the larger body of Christ. Would you please let people know about your book, where they can get that book?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you. The book is entitled Well Sent, and it was just released last October. So you can easily get it on Amazon. You can get a Kindle version on Amazon. But you might also want to check a separate website. It's just clcpublications.com. And especially if anybody's interested in getting like 10 copies or more, which some people have done. I understand someone somewhere at some point, they bought 100 copies at once. You can get a significant discount if you go through the clcpublications.com if you're looking for more than 10 copies. So we just trust that the book will be a blessing to you.
Yeah, I hope folks listening will pick it up. It is excellent. I've been recommending it as of late. Just great work, Steve. I thank you again for taking the time to put that together and sharing. I also want to mention 1615 at this point. One of the things that our organization does, in fact our primary mission, is to take churches through a process to develop a strategic missions vision strategy like Steve described at his church. They did their own process, but I think, Steve, you would say that you had a journey that got you to the place where you're at today. Is that correct?
That's for sure. It takes time and perseverance, and it does.
And I think that's important because a lot of listeners hear what's going on and probably maybe in a good sense a little jealous because they see what's going on. And again, that's the result of process, time, and energy. One of the things we do is we come alongside churches. We help them discover where they're at. We help them to design a strategy. We help them with leadership, buying all those pieces you described, Steve. So if you're interested in missions coaching, please let us know. We'd be happy to send you a DVD and a few brochures to let you know how our process can help your church develop an endemic global vision. Also want to mention a few upcoming events. We have a webinar coming up on September 14th at 12 noon. Jeff Jackson of Shepherd Staff will be talking about missionary debriefing, an essential and valuable gift. When full-time missionaries come home, how do you help them with that transition? And Jeff was a pioneer missionary, planting among the unreached, so he has experience in this area. Hope you'll tune in for that. And then also on August 17th, we have a webinar on releasing radical missions generosity. I think we all are aware that all the resources needed to finish the Great Commission are in churches, but how do we release those resources will be the topic of this webinar. And then I want to mention the Mission Table, ministry that we launched last year. It's an online interactive conversation about missions where we bring together leading missions thinkers and experts, and we tackle some of the most critical, controversial topics impacting missions today. We recently rolled out a topic called Rethinking the Native Missionary, and we really unpack the importance of rethinking the Native missionary model, and I think you talked a little bit about that, Steve, today in your webinar with the Global South,
right,
and this idea of missionaries anymore, and we really do address that in this conversation. Again, I want to thank you, Steve, for your time. I'm going to leave this slide up for a few moments here if you want to get the information on Calvary Church, also Steve's email, and I believe he gave out Terry's email as well if you're interested in some of those resources. And then 1615's contact info is also available. So again, I want to remind everyone that this webinar will be available for download and viewing in probably about a week. Thank you again, Steve, for your time, your generosity, and your wisdom. I'm Matthew Ellison from 1615. Thanks for listening.